I'm Emily, 32 years old. I sat at the Christmas dinner table in our cozy dining room, the one Mark and I had decorated with twinkling lights and a fresh pine wreath just yesterday, feeling the warmth from the fireplace flicker across my face as I helped our two kids, Lily, who's 5, and Tommy, who's 3, settle into their seats with plates of turkey and mashed potatoes. The air smelled like roasted herbs and cranberry sauce, and I had spent the whole afternoon cooking with Susan, my mother-in-law, trying to make everything perfect for this family gathering on Christmas Eve in 2025. Mark, my husband of 7 years, smiled at me from across the table, his hand briefly squeezing mine under the cloth as we all raised our glasses for a toast. But then Susan cleared her throat with that knowing grin she always has, the one that makes me feel like she's judging every move I make. "I've got a little surprise for everyone tonight," Susan said, her voice all cheerful and excited as she stood up from her chair at the head of the table, smoothing down her red holiday sweater like she was about to unveil a gift. I looked up at her, curious but not worried yet, thinking maybe she had baked an extra pie or invited a neighbor over for dessert, since she's always been the one to take charge of these events ever since Mark's dad passed away 3 years ago. But then the doorbell rang, and Susan's eyes lit up even more as she hurried to answer it, leaving the rest of us exchanging glances while the kids giggled about Santa possibly showing up early. When Susan came back into the room, she wasn't alone, and my stomach twisted hard as I saw Lisa standing there beside her, Mark's ex-girlfriend from college, the one he dated for 2 years before we met, looking all polished in a green dress with her hair perfectly curled and a bottle of wine in her hand like she belonged here. "Look who I ran into at the store last week," Susan announced proudly, pulling out an extra chair from the corner and setting a place for Lisa right next to Mark, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Lisa's family is out of town this year, so I thought, why not invite her to join us for old time's sake? It's Christmas, after all, a time for reunions. Welcome to Stories of Auntie Maya. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Drop a comment down below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you, right? Now, I read every single comment, and it helps me to know I'm not alone in this. Mark's face went pale for a second, his fork pausing midway to his mouth, but he managed a weak smile and said, "Hey Lisa, wow, it's been ages. Merry Christmas." I felt my heart pounding in my chest, the betrayal hitting me like a slap as I realized Susan had planned this all along, without even mentioning it to me or Mark, turning our family dinner into some awkward blast from the past. Lily tugged at my sleeve and asked, "Mommy, who's that lady?" And I forced a smile, whispering back that she was an old friend of Daddy's. But inside, I was reeling from the humiliation of having to sit there while Lisa hugged Mark hello, her hand lingering on his shoulder a bit too long. For years, Susan had been dropping these subtle hints that I wasn't quite up to par, like commenting on how Lisa had that high-powered job in marketing while I stayed home with the kids, or how Lisa always knew how to throw the best parties back in the day. I'd brush it off, telling myself it was just her way of grieving or holding on to memories. But tonight, it felt like she'd crossed a line, inviting Lisa here to rub it in my face during what was supposed to be our special holiday. "Isn't this fun?" Susan said as she poured wine for Lisa, completely ignoring the tension in the air while I gripped my napkin under the table, trying not to let the kids see how upset I was. Lisa slid into her seat and started chatting right away, saying, "Mark, you look great, and these kids are adorable. Susan's told me so much about your life now." Mark nodded politely, glancing at me with an apologetic look. But he didn't say anything to stop it, which only made the knot in my gut tighten more. I picked up my fork to poke at my food, but my hand was shaking. And that's when it slipped from my fingers, clattering loudly onto the plate and making everyone turn to stare at me. In that frozen moment, with all eyes on me, something inside snapped, and I couldn't hold back the words that had been building up for so long. "You invited her here on purpose, didn't you, Susan?" I said, my voice coming out sharper than I intended, the room going dead silent as the kids stopped eating and Mark's mouth opened in surprise. Susan blinked at me, her smile fading just a little, and replied, "Emily, dear, don't be dramatic. It's just dinner." Oh, but I wasn't buying it. Not after all the times she'd compared me to Lisa behind my back, making me feel like I had to prove I was worthy of being Mark's wife every single day. The injustice of it all boiled over, this open cruelty on Christmas of all days, when I had poured my heart into making this evening perfect for our family. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her chair, murmuring, "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." But Susan waved her off, saying, "Nonsense, you're welcome here anytime." Mark finally spoke up, his tone cautious as he said, "Mom, maybe we should have talked about this first." But it was too late. The damage was done. And I sat there feeling exposed and humiliated in my own home. As the seconds ticked by, I picked up my fork again, but my mind was racing. The shock of seeing Lisa here, mixing with years of built-up resentment towards Susan's meddling. The kids whispered to each other, sensing something was wrong, and I had to force myself to eat a bite, pretending everything was fine for their sake. Deep down, though, I knew this wasn't just a surprise guest. It was Susan's way of reminding me that, in her eyes, I'd always be second best. I stared at my plate for a moment after dropping the fork, the clatter still echoing in my ears as everyone turned to look at me, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks from the embarrassment of it all. Susan just raised an eyebrow and said, "Emily, are you all right? You seem a bit on edge tonight." Her tone all sweet and concerned, like she hadn't just dropped this bomb on our dinner. I picked up the fork again, forcing myself to nod and mutter, "I'm fine, just clumsy." But inside, my mind was racing, trying to process why she would do this, inviting Lisa here without a word to me or Mark. Mark cleared his throat and tried to change the subject, asking Tommy if he liked the turkey. But Susan wasn't having it. She leaned forward and said, "Oh, come on, Emily, it's Christmas, a time to share joy with old friends." Lisa's practically family after all those years she and Mark were together. Lisa smiled politely and added, "I appreciate the invite, Susan. It's nice to catch up," as she reached for the mashed potatoes, her eyes flicking toward Mark like she was gauging his reaction. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, like someone had twisted a knife, because it was clear now that this wasn't some random act of kindness. Susan had planned it too. Stir things up to make me question my place here at the table. The conversation shifted as Susan started reminiscing, saying, "Remember that Christmas back in college, Mark? You and Lisa went skiing in Aspen, and you came back with those hilarious stories about falling down the slopes." Mark chuckled a little, rubbing the back of his neck as he replied, "Yeah, Mom." That was a long time ago. But he didn't shut it down completely, which stung even more because I needed him to stand up for us, for our family. Lily looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mommy, did Daddy go skiing with that lady?" And I had to smile and say, "It was before we met, sweetie." While forcing down a bite of food that tasted like cardboard now, Susan kept going, pouring more wine for everyone as she said, "Lisa, tell Emily about that time you two backpacked through Europe. Mark was so adventurous back then." Lisa laughed softly and started sharing details, like how they got lost in Paris and ended up at some tiny cafe, her voice light and nostalgic as if those memories were still fresh. Mark joined in a bit, saying, "We did have some fun times." And I sat there gripping my fork tighter, feeling sidelined in my own home, like I was the outsider listening to stories that didn't include me. The kids were getting fidgety, Tommy banging his spoon on the table, but I couldn't even focus on them because every word felt like a dig, reminding me of how Susan had always favored Lisa, always hinted that she was the one who got away. I tried to jump in, asking Lisa about her job to steer things away, but Susan cut me off with, "Oh, Emily, Lisa's doing so well in marketing now, heading up a big team. Isn't that impressive?" Lisa nodded and said, "It's busy, but rewarding." While Mark gave me a quick glance that said he was sorry, but he still wasn't stopping the flow. The betrayal sank deeper, because this wasn't just harmless chat. It was Susan pushing Lisa back into the picture, maybe hoping to spark something old, to make me look like the boring stay-at-home mom who didn't measure up. My heart pounded harder, and I realized this was deliberate, her way of undermining our marriage right in front of the kids on Christmas Eve. As the plates got passed around again, Susan turned to me directly and said, "Emily, you don't mind, do you? It's all in good fun, reliving the past." I forced a tight smile and replied, "Of course not." But my voice came out flatter than I wanted, and inside anger was building, planting that first seed of wanting to push back somehow. Mark finally spoke up a little more, saying, "Mom, maybe we can talk about something else, like the kids' gifts from Santa." But Susan waved him off with a laugh, insisting, "Nonsense. Lisa's here to celebrate with us." Lisa chimed in, "I don't want to intrude." But she didn't get up to leave. And the way she looked at Mark made my jealousy flare, like she was enjoying this too much. The dinner dragged on like that, with more stories bubbling up, each one making me feel smaller, more invisible, as if our 7 years together meant nothing compared to their old history. Tommy spilled his juice at one point, and I jumped up to clean it, grateful for the distraction. But even then, Susan commented, "See, Lisa was always so graceful, never a spill in sight." Mark sighed and said, "Mom, that's enough." But it was weak, and he didn't press it, leaving me to wonder why he wasn't defending me more. I sat back down, my mind turning over the injustice of it all, how Susan had turned our holiday into her little game, and that's when the idea hit me. I couldn't just sit here forever. I had to find a way to turn this around, even if it meant digging into why she was so obsessed with the past. By the time we got to dessert, the room felt thick with tension, the twinkling lights mocking the cheer we were supposed to have. And I poked at my pie without eating much. Susan raised her glass for another toast, saying, "To old friends and new beginnings." And everyone clinked except me. I just lifted mine halfway, my grip tight. Mark whispered to me, "We'll talk later." But it didn't help the knot in my stomach, the growing resolve that this meddling had to stop. Lisa excused herself to the bathroom, and in that brief moment, Susan leaned over and said quietly, "See, Emily?" Mark lights up around her, just something to think about. That was the final push, confirming her intent to question my role, to make me the outsider in my own marriage. And I knew then that I couldn't let this slide. I had to start planning how to fight back, quietly at first. Lisa took another sip of her wine and leaned back in her chair, her laughter fading as Susan picked up an old photo album from the sideboard that she'd brought over earlier, flipping it open with that carefree smile like we were all in on some delightful family tradition. I watched her turn the pages, my stomach already knotting from the earlier stories, and tried to stay focused on serving seconds to the kids. But the way Susan's eyes lit up made it clear she wasn't done pulling us back into the past. Mark glanced at the album and shifted in his seat, his fork pausing as he said quietly, "Mom, maybe we can look at that later." But Susan just waved him off gently, saying, "Oh, come on. It's Christmas. Let's share some happy memories while we're all here." She held up a faded photo of Mark and Lisa from years ago, standing arm in arm at a lakeside cabin, and said nostalgically, "Look at this one from that weekend trip you two took up north. Mark, you always said how much you loved those quiet mornings with Lisa, brewing coffee and watching the mist on the water." Lisa nodded with a soft smile and added, "Those were cozy times, weren't they?" We'd sit on the porch, sharing our little inside jokes, like that silly catchphrase we had, "Adventure awaits," every time we'd spot a deer or something. Mark's face tightened a bit more, and he set his knife down, saying, "Yeah, but that was a different chapter. Mom, let's talk about now." His voice showing real discomfort this time, but he didn't press it harder, just looked down at his plate, and that hesitation cut me deeper because it left the door open for them to keep going. I felt pushed further to the edges as Susan encouraged Lisa with, "Tell us more about those habits you two had, like packing those special picnics with Mark's favorite sandwiches. It's fun to remember how in sync you were." Lisa chuckled lightly and shared, "He'd always forget the mustard, so I'd tease him about it." But we'd end up laughing over the simplest things, just enjoying the peace. The details pulled them closer in the conversation, making our current life feel distant. And I tried to pull it back by saying, "That sounds nice. But remember our family picnic last spring, Mark, with the kids flying kites at the park?" Susan brushed it aside smoothly, replying, "Oh, that's sweet, Emily, but these old tales are just too charming to skip." Mark lit up so much during those trips. Lily stopped eating her carrots and looked around the table with a puzzled frown, asking in her small voice, "Why are you talking about old stuff? Grandma, is something wrong?" Tommy went unusually quiet too, his spoon hovering as he stared at everyone, the anxiety in his eyes making him cling to my arm. And that innocent awareness hit me hard, stirring up jealousy over the spotlight on Lisa while shame washed over me that the kids were seeing me sidelined like this. Mark noticed and tried again, saying, "Mom, the kids are getting bored. How about we switch to dessert plans?" But Susan kept her tone light and nostalgic, adding, "Just one more bit, dear. Lisa, remember how Mark would hum that old tune during your drives? The one from your favorite playlist?" The private habit she mentioned felt too intimate, like a window into a bond I wasn't part of. And as Lisa hummed a few notes with a grin, saying, "Yeah, it always calmed us down after a long day. Mark interrupted more firmly this time with, "Okay, enough reminiscing for now." But he trailed off without enforcing it, his weakness leaving me isolated in the flood of their shared past. Lily whispered to me anxiously, "Mommy, I don't like this." Her silence after that amplifying the tension, and Tommy started fidgeting harder, dropping his napkin as the room's cheer drained away. I gripped my fork, the jealousy and shame building to where I couldn't take another word, and that's when it slipped from my shaking hand, clattering loudly onto the plate and freezing everyone in silence. The room went dead quiet, all eyes turning to me as the sound echoed off the walls. Mark reaching out under the table but pulling back, Susan tilting her head with feigned concern, and Lisa pausing mid-sip. I picked up the fork quickly and muttered, "Sorry, just a little slip, must be the wine," forcing a weak laugh to hide the storm inside. But in that moment, I felt utterly alone at the table. The betrayal sinking in as a direct violation of our marriage and my place in this family. The limit had been reached. There was no going back to pretending this was just an uncomfortable dinner. As the silence lingered, Tommy whimpered softly, giving me the excuse to push back my chair and say, "I'll take the kids to the kitchen for some cookies to settle them," scooping him up and leading Lily by the hand, my heart pounding as I stepped away from the table. I carried Tommy into the kitchen with Lily trailing behind me, her small hand clutching mine as we left the dining room behind. The twinkling lights from the tree fading into the background while the sounds of Susan's laughter followed us like a shadow. The kitchen still smelled of the turkey I'd roasted earlier that day, the counters cluttered with dirty pots and leftover sides, but I set Tommy down on the floor and knelt to open the cookie jar, handing one to each of them to keep them occupied. "Here you go, munchkins, chocolate chip just like you like," I said softly, forcing a smile as Lily bit into hers and asked, "Mommy, why is Grandma talking so much about that lady?" I brushed her hair back and replied, "It's just grown-up stuff, sweetie, nothing to worry about." But my voice cracked a little, the weight of the evening pressing down harder now that we were out of sight. Tommy toddled over to the fridge, pointing at the drawings we'd stuck there with magnets, and I grabbed a sippy cup to fill with milk, trying to steady my breathing as the humiliation from the table replayed in my head. I could hear muffled voices from the dining room, Mark saying something low, Susan responding with that same carefree tone, and it took everything in me not to march back in there and demand answers. Lily finished her cookie and hugged my leg, whispering, "I want to go open presents now." And I nodded, saying, "Soon, baby, let's just give Daddy a minute." But inside, the isolation was sinking in, like the family I'd built was crumbling right under me on this Christmas Eve. As the kids munched quietly, I stepped closer to the doorway to listen, not wanting to eavesdrop but needing to know if Mark was finally standing up for us. That's when I heard Susan's voice, low but clear, whispering to Lisa, "Mark was so much happier before, back when things were simpler with you. None of this domestic routine weighing him down." Lisa murmured back, "I don't want to stir trouble, but he does seem tense tonight." And Susan added, "Exactly, dear. He needs that spark again. Emily tries, but it's not the same." When my heart stopped for a second, the words stripping away the last bit of dignity I had left, making me feel like an unwanted burden in my own marriage, cast out from the family I'd poured my everything into. I froze there in the doorway, the cookie jar lid still in my hand, as Mark's voice chimed in weakly from the table, "Mom, let's not go there." But he didn't deny it, didn't defend me, just let the whisper hang like a judgment. The kids didn't notice, Tommy crumbling his cookie on the floor and Lily drawing shapes in the crumbs. But I felt utterly alone, the outrage building as I realized no one was stepping in to stop this. Not my husband, not even for the sake of our holiday. I wiped a tear that escaped, whispering to myself, "Get it together, Emily." But the emotional humiliation hit rock bottom, leaving me with no appetite, no sense of belonging, just a hollow ache in my chest. We stayed in the kitchen a bit longer, me pretending to tidy up while the voices continued softly, Susan shifting to lighter topics, but the damage already done. When I finally led the kids back to the dining room, plates were being cleared, and Susan looked up with a smile, saying, "There you are, cookies already. Save some for Santa." I nodded tightly and sat down, helping Tommy into his booster seat as Lisa offered, "Need a hand with that?" But I shook my head, replying shortly, "I've got it," feeling the isolation wrap around me like a cold blanket. Mark reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it once, but he said nothing more. his silence amplifying the pain as the evening dragged on. The rest of the meal blurred into silence for me. Everyone else chatting about neutral things like the weather forecast for snow tomorrow, while I poked at my cold food without eating a bite. Susan suggested opening one gift each before bed, handing a wrapped box to Lisa first, who unwrapped a scarf and thanked her warmly, saying, "This is perfect, Susan, just like old times." Mark opened his next, a book on hiking trails, and he murmured, "Thanks, Mom." Glancing at me apologetically, but I just forced a smile when my turn came, unwrapping earrings that felt meaningless now. The kids tore into their gifts excitedly, Lily getting a doll and Tommy a stuffed bear, their giggles the only real joy left in the room. But even that couldn't pierce the fog of my humiliation. As we wrapped up, Susan pulled Mark aside for a quick hug, whispering something I couldn't hear, and Lisa lingered by the door, saying goodbye with, "It was lovely seeing you all. Merry Christmas." I managed a polite nod, bundling the kids into their coats as Mark walked them out, the front door clicking shut behind them. Back inside, the house felt empty, the decorations mocking what should have been a happy night, and I retreated to the living room couch, staring at the tree while Mark busied himself in the kitchen. "You okay?" he asked finally, sitting beside me, but I just shook my head, replying, "Not really, Mark. Tonight was awful." And he sighed, saying, "I know, I'll talk to Mom tomorrow." But his words rang hollow, leaving me isolated in my thoughts as the clock ticked toward midnight. The kids fell asleep quickly after stories, their little faces peaceful in bed. But I lay awake next to Mark, who dozed off without another word, the betrayal replaying over and over. Susan's whisper echoed in my mind, confirming every insecurity she'd planted over the years. And with no allies to turn to, not even my husband fully on my side, I hit the lowest point, stripped of my role in this family, the outrage simmering into a deep, silent resolve that something had to change. I stared at the ceiling in our bedroom long after Mark had fallen asleep beside me, the glow from the digital clock on the nightstand showing it was past midnight. Officially Christmas Day 2025, but the holiday spirit felt miles away after everything that had happened at dinner. The house was quiet now, the kids tucked in with their new toys clutched in their little hands, but my mind wouldn't shut off, replaying Susan's whisper about Mark being happier before, the way Lisa had lingered in our space like she still belonged there. I wiped away the last of my tears with the back of my hand, sitting up slowly so I wouldn't wake Mark, and slipped out of bed, pulling on my robe as I padded downstairs to the living room where the Christmas tree lights still twinkled softly in the dark. The couch felt cold as I sank into it, wrapping my arms around myself, but the crying had stopped, replaced by a quiet anger that burned steady in my chest. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and scrolled through old photos, trying to distract myself. But then I remembered a vague rumor I'd heard years ago at a family gathering, something about Susan having her own secrets back when Mark's dad was alive, maybe an affair or hidden money, but I'd always dismissed it as gossip. Now, with her meddling fresh in my mind, it didn't seem so far-fetched, and I decided right there that I wouldn't let this slide anymore. I'd play along like everything was fine while I started digging quietly into her motives, reclaiming some control before she could push me out further. I texted my sister, Anna, who lived a couple hours away and had always been my go-to for advice since we were kids. She was 35, a no-nonsense accountant who saw through people's bullshit faster than anyone I knew. "Hey, you up? Rough night with Susan. Need to vent," I typed, hitting send before I could second-guess it. And she replied almost immediately with, "Of course, Em. Call me?" I dialed her number and put the phone to my ear, keeping my voice low as I paced the living room rug, the tree ornaments catching the light with each step. "Emily, what happened? You sound wrecked," Anna said when she picked up, her tone concerned but steady, like she was already gearing up to help. I told her about the dinner, the surprise invite for Lisa, the endless stories that shut me out, the kids picking up on the tension, and finally overhearing Susan's whisper that Mark was happier before me. It felt like she was trying to erase me from my own family, Anna. "Right there at the table on Christmas Eve," I said, my words tumbling out as I stopped by the window, staring at the snowy yard outside. She listened without interrupting, then sighed and replied, "That woman's always had it out for you, but this is next level." Sounds like she's projecting her own crap. Remember that old story Aunt June mentioned about Susan and some guy from work years ago? I nodded even though she couldn't see me, leaning against the wall as the memory sharpened. "Yeah, something about hidden letters or emails, but I never dug into it." Mark's dad was sick back then, and it got brushed under the rug. Anna paused for a second, then said, "Well, maybe it's time to look closer. You can't just roll over, Em. You've built this life with Mark and the kids. Play nice for now, but start gathering info. I can help. I've got access to public records through work if we need it." Her words sparked something in me, a shift from feeling broken to feeling focused, and I agreed, saying, "You're right, I'm done being the victim here. I'll act like nothing's wrong, but I'll snoop around Susan's old stuff next time I'm at her place." We talked a bit more. Anna suggesting I check Mark's old family emails if I could get access without him knowing, and she promised to drive over in a couple days to brainstorm in person. "You've got this, sis. Don't let her win," she said before we hung up. Her encouragement like a lifeline pulling me out of the pit. I set the phone down and headed to the home office down the hall, where Mark kept some old boxes from his parents' house after his dad passed, figuring it was a safe place to start without raising alarms. The room was dim, lit only by the desk lamp I flicked on, and I pulled out a dusty box labeled Family Docs from the closet shelf, sifting through faded papers and photos quietly. Most of it was junk, old bills, holiday cards, but then I spotted an envelope with Susan's handwriting, tucked in the back, containing a printed email from over a decade ago addressed to someone named Robert, with vague lines about our little secret and keeping it from the family. My pulse quickened as I read it, the words hinting at something hidden without spelling it out, and I snapped a photo with my phone before putting everything back exactly as it was. Mark stirred upstairs, calling out softly, "Em, you coming back to bed?" And I froze for a second, then called back, "Yeah, just getting water. Be right there." I slipped the phone into my robe pocket and headed to the kitchen for a glass, sipping it slowly as the first clue settled in my mind, a small but solid piece that could lead to more. This wasn't about revenge yet, just reclaiming my power, but the decision felt firm now. I'd play weak around Susan and Mark, smiling through the holidays, while I quietly built my case. Back in bed, I lay beside Mark, who mumbled sleepily, "Everything okay?" And I replied, "Just couldn't sleep, but I'm fine now," turning away so he wouldn't see the determination in my eyes. The tears were gone for good, replaced by a plan taking shape, with Anna's support and that old email as my starting point. As the night wore on, I finally drifted off, knowing this was the turning point. I wouldn't let Susan's games destroy us. I'd fight back smarter, one step at a time. I got up early on Christmas morning, the house still quiet with everyone else asleep, and headed straight to the home office while the coffee brewed in the kitchen. My mind fixed on that one email I'd photographed last night from the family docs box. Mark had backed up his dad's old computer files onto an external drive after the funeral, 3 years ago, when Susan handed over a bunch of stuff from their house without really sorting it. She's never been good with tech, always printing things out or scanning them haphazardly. So personal emails got mixed in with bills and medical records by accident. I plugged the drive into my laptop at the desk, the screen lighting up the dim room as I searched folders methodically, starting with scanned documents since that's where printed emails might land, and after clicking through a few unrelated PDFs, like old tax forms, I found a subfolder called Personal Scans buried deep in the backups. The first few files were just handwritten notes from Mark's dad about his treatments, but then I opened a scanned PDF of a printed email chain from 10 years back, during the worst of his illness, where Susan wrote to this Robert person, "We've got to be careful with our meetings, timing them around the hospital visits so no one questions." Robert replied in the next page, "I miss our time together, Sue, but you're right. Discretion is key." It didn't spell out anything explicit, but the tone suggested a secret relationship, something hidden while Mark's dad was suffering, and I saved a screenshot to my phone, feeling a cold focus settle in as I kept looking without jumping to conclusions yet. Mark stirred in the hallway then, calling out, "Em, coffee ready?" And I closed the laptop quickly, replying, "Coming right up, just checking a recipe." As I unplugged the drive and tucked it back in the drawer, the kids woke up soon after, racing downstairs for presents. And we spent the morning in the living room with wrapping paper everywhere, Lily squealing over her dollhouse and Tommy pushing his new truck around the rug. Mark hugged me from the side and said, "This is what matters, right? Us as a family." And I nodded, saying, "Absolutely, let's make it a good day." But my thoughts stayed on those scans, planning to dig more once I had a moment alone. Susan FaceTimed us around 11. her face filling the screen as she sat in her living room with her own tree in the background, saying cheerfully, "Merry Christmas, darlings. I hope the kids are thrilled with their gifts. I picked out that dollhouse myself." Mark held the phone up so everyone could see, replying, "They love it, Mom, thanks. How's your morning?" While she went on boasting, "Oh, wonderful. I was just telling my neighbor about last night's dinner. Lisa fitting right in made it so special. Like old times. Everyone agrees it's nice to keep connections alive." I stayed off camera, stirring hot chocolate in the kitchen and listening as Susan kept talking, her voice full of that smug confidence like she'd orchestrated the perfect holiday without a hitch. Lisa even messaged me thanks this morning. Said it brightened her Christmas being with familiar faces. "We should plan another get-together soon. Mark, you'd enjoy that, wouldn't you?" Mark hesitated and said, "Maybe, Mom, but we're taking it easy today." Not shutting her down completely, his avoidance leaving that familiar gap where I wished he'd step up more. After the call, while Mark helped the kids build the dollhouse, I slipped back to the office under the guise of wrapping a late gift, reopening the drive and scanning more PDFs, this time finding financial statements from the same period, showing transfers from the family account to an address in another state, labeled as charity contributions, but timed oddly right after those email dates, amounts like $5,000 here and there that didn't match any known donations. One transfer note caught my eye, a scanned receipt for support expenses, with Robert's name in the memo line, and it made me pause, thinking something didn't add up. Why hide these as charity if they were legit? I texted Anna the details. More scans, secret meetings hinted, plus weird money transfers labeled charity. Address in Ohio linked to Robert. She replied fast, "Send me the address. I can check public property records online. See who owns it. No job access needed, just free databases like county sites." I forwarded the info, and while waiting, I found another printed email in the files. Susan writing, "The little one's needs are growing. We'll have to adjust the amount soon," which planted a suspicion in my mind about maybe a child involved, though it was vague, just enough to make me wonder without proof yet. Anna texted back after a bit. "Property owned by Robert Klein. No family listed publicly, but there's a school district record for a dependent around the right age. Slow down, Em. This looks deliberate, but we need to verify legally without rushing." Mark knocked on the door then, saying, "Lunchtime? Kids are asking for you." And I closed everything up, replying, "On my way, just organizing some photos," feeling the internal shift as I joined them at the table, the evidence stacking quietly in my favor. Susan showed up unexpectedly that afternoon, knocking with a basket of cookies and more toys, hugging Mark at the door and saying, "Couldn't stay away. Wanted to see the grandkids' faces in person." She sat on the couch, still riding high as she told Mark, "My book club friends loved hearing about the dinner. They said inviting Lisa was genius. Keeps the family vibrant. Emily, you must agree it added some spark, right?" I handed her a coffee and said evenly, "It was memorable, Susan," keeping my tone neutral while inside. The scans and records tilted things toward me, strong enough to stir doubt if I chose, but not ready for anything bigger yet. We spent the next hour with her playing with the kids, boasting more about how her social circle envied her lively holidays, and Mark nodded along, saying little like, "Glad you're happy, Mom," without probing deeper. Anna called me briefly while Susan was distracted, whispering, "Found a public court docket. Minor filing for support years ago. Names match, but sealed details. This could be leverage, but hold off. Not enough for legal action without more. Stay tactical." I agreed, saying, "Thanks, sis," slow and sure, and hung up, pocketing my phone as Susan prepared to leave, kissing everyone goodbye and adding to Mark, "Tell Lisa I said hi if you chat. She's such a breath of fresh air." As the door closed behind her, she waved triumphantly from the driveway, completely unaware, while I stood at the window holding my coffee, the gathered pieces in my hidden files shifting the balance inside me, enough to know I had the upper hand starting to form, even if the game wasn't over yet. The day after Christmas, I woke up with that cold focus still holding strong, the scanned emails and financial records tucked away in my hidden cloud folder as I made breakfast for the family in the kitchen. Pancakes sizzling on the griddle while the kids played with their new toys in the living room. Mark came down in his pajamas, yawning as he poured coffee and said, "Morning, Em. Anna coming over today?" I nodded and flipped a pancake, replying, "Yeah, around noon. She wants to see the kids and catch up." But really, Anna was driving over to help me sort through the evidence in person, away from prying eyes, and I figured this was the perfect time to test the waters with Mark, planting a small seed of doubt about Susan without showing my full hand yet. The kids ran in then, Lily holding her doll and Tommy pushing his truck across the floor, and I served them plates first, cutting the pancakes into small pieces as Mark sat at the table, scrolling his phone. "Any plans today?" he asked, looking up with a smile, and I took a breath, deciding to drop the hint casually while pouring syrup. "Not much, just family time. Hey Mark, I overheard something weird at dinner the other night. Like Susan mentioning an old family secret or something. Didn't catch the details, but it sounded off." He paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, his brow furrowing as he said, "What do you mean? Mom doesn't have secrets, she's an open book." I shrugged and sat down across from him, keeping my tone light but pointed. "Maybe it's nothing, but it stuck with me, just thought you should know, in case it's tied to why she's pushing Lisa so hard." Mark set his fork down and leaned back, rubbing his chin as he replied, "That doesn't sound like her, probably just holiday talk. But yeah, the Lisa thing was weird. I'll ask her about it later." I could see the doubt flicker in his eyes, that first small rift in their mother-son bond, and it gave me a quiet boost, knowing this was just a test to shake his trust without revealing the scans yet. The kids chattered about their toys, Lily saying, "Mommy, can we build a fort later?" And I smiled at her, replying, "Sure, sweetie, after Aunt Anna gets here." While Mark poked at his food, clearly mulling over my words. He didn't press for more, but the seed was planted. And when he kissed me goodbye before heading to the garage to tinker with his tools, he added, "Love you, Em, don't worry too much about Mom's quirks." Anna arrived right on time, pulling into the driveway with her practical sedan, and I greeted her at the door with a hug, whispering, "Kids are napping upstairs. Let's go to the office." She followed me in, her laptop under her arm, and we sat at the desk where I pulled up the cloud files on my screen, showing her the scanned emails about the secret meetings and the suspicious transfers. "This is solid so far," Anna said, scanning the PDFs with a focused look. "But we need to cross-reference that Ohio address with more public records, maybe voter rolls or old directories to see if there's a kid linked." I nodded and replied, "Agreed, but I already tested a small move this morning." Mentioned a family secret to Mark without details. He looked thrown off. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Smart, Em, starts the distrust without a big splash. Just keep it subtle for now." We worked quietly for an hour, Anna pulling up free county sites on her laptop and finding a public directory listing for Robert Klein at that address, with a note about a dependent in school records from years back, vague but adding to the suspicion. "No names yet," she said, jotting notes, "but this timeline matches the emails. Something deliberate was going on." Mark poked his head in then, saying, "Hey Anna, good to see you. Want some lunch?" And she stood to hug him, replying, "Sure, bro-in-law, lead the way." Over sandwiches in the kitchen, I stayed quiet as Anna chatted with Mark about work, but I noticed him glancing at me, that morning's hint still lingering in his expression. Susan called Mark's phone that afternoon while we were all in the living room, the kids building their fort with blankets, and he put it on speaker as usual, her voice booming out, "Hello, dears. How's the post-Christmas cleanup? I was just bragging to my yoga group about our perfect dinner. Lisa really made it shine." Mark hesitated for a second, then said, "Yeah, Mom, it was fine. But Em mentioned overhearing you talk about some family secret the other night. What's that about?" There was a pause on her end, and when she replied, her tone turned defensive. "Oh, that? Probably nothing, just old stories, don't read into it, Mark." Emily must have misheard in all the excitement. I caught Anna's eye across the room, and she gave a subtle nod, confirming the small strike had landed as Susan shifted topics quickly, adding, "Anyway, Lisa's asking about you, said she'd love to grab coffee sometime." Mark wrapped up the call soon after, saying, "Okay, Mom, talk later, kids are calling," and hung up, turning to me with a puzzled look. "She sounded off, Em. Maybe there is something she's not saying." I kept my face neutral and replied, "Could be. Families have their hidden bits," planting another layer without pushing too hard. Anna chimed in casually, "Yeah, my family's got a few skeletons too, nothing major." But I knew it was helping nudge the distrust along. Later, as Anna and I cleaned up the fort, she whispered, "Good first blow, she's defensive now." And Mark's questioning. Lisa might back off if word spreads. That evening, Mark got a text from Lisa. I saw it pop up on his phone while we prepped dinner, him showing it to me openly. Hey Mark, Susan mentioned coffee? But if it's awkward, no worries. Merry Christmas. He replied right there, thanks Lisa, but things are busy. Take care. And I felt the small rift widen, Lisa distancing herself slightly as the doubt took hold. Susan texted the family group chat later, posting a meme about holiday memories. But her usual boastful caption felt forced, like she was covering. Mark commented back neutrally, nice pic, Mom, without his typical enthusiasm, and I sat on the couch after the kids were in bed, sipping tea as he joined me, saying, that secret thing's bugging me. I'll dig a bit next time I see her. Anna left after dinner, hugging me at the door and whispering, confidence boost, right? This test worked? Keep building. I nodded and replied softly, definitely. Small steps, but it's shifting. Mark and I watched a movie that night, his arm around me, but I could tell his mind was on Susan, the mother-son bond cracking just enough from that planted doubt. As we headed to bed, he said, love you, Em. Thanks for pointing that out. And I smiled back. Anytime, honey, feeling my own assurance grow without a full confrontation yet. The day ended with me checking the cloud files one more time. The evidence safe and the first counterblow delivered, testing the waters successfully. The next morning, I got up before the sun rose and headed to the kitchen to make coffee. My mind replaying yesterday's small win with Mark questioning Susan on the phone and Lisa backing off with her text. The house was still dark and quiet, the kids' toys scattered from their play fort, and I sat at the table with my laptop open, reviewing the cloud files again to make sure everything was backed up securely. Mark came down soon after, kissing the top of my head as he grabbed a mug and said, morning, Em. Slept okay? That call with Mom yesterday was weird. She's usually so straightforward. I nodded and replied, yeah, it was off, but maybe it's nothing big. Keeping my cool while inside, I felt the momentum building from that planted doubt. We had breakfast as a family, the kids munching on cereal while Lily chattered about wanting to visit Grandma soon, and Tommy banged his spoon happily on the high chair. Mark checked his phone and frowned a little, saying, Mom texted me late last night. Wants to come over today to talk things out. Guess she's still thinking about that secret comment. I poured more milk for Tommy and said evenly, sure, if you think it's a good idea. But my stomach tightened, sensing she might be onto something after getting defensive on the call. Anna messaged me privately then. Watch your back today if she's coming. She's probably pushing back. Keep the evidence hidden. I texted back quick, will do, staying one step ahead, and slipped my phone away as Mark cleared the table, adding, I'll handle her, Em. Don't want any more attention. Susan showed up around lunchtime, knocking firmly on the door with a covered dish in hand, her face set in that determined smile as Mark let her in. She hugged the kids first, handing Lily a new coloring book and saying, for my favorite artists, Grandma missed you yesterday. Then she turned to me in the living room, her tone sharper than usual as she set the dish on the coffee table. Emily, dear, I heard from Mark that you're stirring up old nonsense about some family secret. Must be the holiday stress getting to you. Maybe you're overthinking things. I stood by the couch, folding a blanket from the fort, and replied calmly, I just mentioned what I overheard, Susan. No big deal. But she waved her hand dismissively, adding, well, it's causing unnecessary drama. Mark, you know your mother's not hiding anything. Emily's probably just feeling insecure after Lisa's visit. Mark shifted on the couch where he sat with Tommy on his lap, saying, Mom, let's not escalate. Em didn't mean any harm, but Susan pressed on, her voice rising a bit as she sat down across from him. Insecure and maybe a tad unstable, if you ask me. Spreading rumors like that could hurt the family. Your friends might start wondering if she's fit to raise the kids with all this jealousy. The words hit like a slap, intensifying her sabotage right there in our home. And Lily looked up from her book, asking, Grandma, why are you mad at Mommy? Susan softened her tone for the kids, but shot me a glance, replying, Oh, sweetie, Grandma's just chatting. Adults sometimes disagree. I knelt to help Lily with her crayons, my heart racing but face neutral, as Mark said weakly, Mom, that's not fair. Em's been great. After lunch, while the kids napped upstairs, Susan pulled Mark into the kitchen for a private talk. But I lingered in the hallway, hearing her whisper urgently, Mark, think about it. Emily's planting doubts to drive a wedge between us. She's always been jealous of my bond with you and Lisa. Maybe it's time to reconsider things for the kids' sake. I could help more if she wasn't so erratic. Mark murmured back, Mom, come on, that's extreme. I love Em. But his voice wavered. not shutting her down firmly, and it made my chest ache, feeling like I was losing ground again as she escalated her attacks on my reputation. She added, "And those old family papers? I took some back from your office last time I was here. Better safe than letting misunderstandings brew. No need for anyone digging into ancient history." My pulse spiked at that. She must have snooped during a previous visit and grabbed potential evidence like old letters or statements, destroying or hiding them to cover her tracks. I stepped back to the living room, pretending not to hear, but texted Anna immediately. "She's onto it, took some papers, spreading rumors I'm unstable." "Mark's wavering," Anna replied fast. "Damage control, back up what you have and push him gently. She's threatening her support next, watch." Sure enough, as they came out of the kitchen, Susan turned to me with a fake smile and said, "Emily, I hate to say this, but if this paranoia continues, I might have to rethink helping with the kids' college funds or those family trips. It's for their stability, you understand." The threat hung in the air, her way of intensifying the pressure, and Mark looked uncomfortable, saying, "Well, Mom, no need for that, let's all calm down." But he didn't outright defend me, his hesitation making it seem like our marriage was cracking under the strain. The afternoon dragged as Susan stayed, playing with the kids when they woke up but dropping subtle digs, like telling Lily, "Your mommy's been tired lately, hasn't she? Grandma's here if you need anything." I busied myself with snacks in the kitchen, feeling isolated again as Mark joined her on the floor with Tommy, laughing at his truck noises but glancing at me with uncertainty. "Em, you okay?" he asked quietly when Susan stepped out to her car for a moment, and I nodded, replying, "Just handling it, Mark, but your mom's pushing hard." He sighed and said, "I know, she's protective, but I'll talk to her." Yet his words lacked strength, leaving me worried that her sabotage was working, pulling him back toward her side. Susan left around dinner time, hugging Mark tightly at the door and whispering something I couldn't catch, then turning to me with, "Emily, let's put this behind us. No more wild ideas. All right? For the family's sake." I forced a smile and said, "Of course, Susan, drive safe." But as her car pulled away, Mark turned to me in the hallway, his face conflicted. Mom mentioned you might be stressed out, maybe seeing a counselor. She's worried about the kids." The doubt in his voice hit hard, making it feel like I was on the brink of losing my marriage and family ties all over again, her escalation landing blows that shook everything. I touched his arm and replied softly, "Mark, I'm fine. It's her stirring things up, not me." But he just nodded uncertainly, heading upstairs to bathe the kids while I sat on the couch, texting Anna. "It's bad, she's got him doubting me now." That night, after the kids were asleep, Mark and I sat in bed with the TV on low, but the tension filled the room as he said, "Maybe Mom has a point. Things have been rocky since dinner. We okay?" I turned to him, keeping my voice steady, and replied, "We're okay if we stick together. Mark, don't let her divide us." He hugged me but didn't say more, his waver clear, and I lay awake long after he dozed off, the sabotage intensifying my isolation but fueling my resolve to push through. Anna called late, whispering, "She's striking back hard. Destroyed some evidence? Good thing we have digital copies. Hang in there, we'll turn this around soon." I agreed and hung up, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was teetering on the edge but not broken yet. I got up early, the winter light filtering through the kitchen window as I made coffee. My thoughts already on locking down the evidence after Susan's aggressive pushback yesterday with her threats and whispers. The scanned emails about her secret meetings with Robert were safe in my cloud folder, along with those irregular charity transfers timed during Mark's dad's illness, and Anna's public records showing the Ohio property linked to support dockets that aligned, suspiciously with the memos. Mark came down the stairs in his robe, yawning as he poured himself a cup and said, "Morning, Em. Still thinking about Mom's visit. She texted me again last night, saying she's ready to move past the drama." I set my mug down and replied evenly, "Yeah, Mark, but we can't just ignore it. How about a family meeting to clear everything up? Call it a holiday. Wrap up, invite your aunts and uncle." He nodded slowly and said, "That might help. Get everyone together and talk it out like adults." The kids woke up soon after, Lily asking for oatmeal and Tommy banging his bowl on the high chair. So I served them breakfast while Mark scrolled his phone, texting relatives about the idea. Aunts Carol and Beth said yes, and Uncle Tom too. "New Year's Eve here at the house?" he asked. Looking up, and I agreed, saying, "Perfect. Keep it casual, like reconciliation over dinner." Anna messaged me then, "Smart move, disguise it well. I'll come early to review the dossier. Remind the lawyer about the inheritance angle." I texted back quick, "Done," and push for that legal DNA process if the suspicion holds. Oh, while Mark played with the kids in the living room, building blocks into a tower, I stepped into the office and printed hard copies of the core evidence. The emails showing the hidden relationship, the transfer scans with memos to Robert's address, and the sealed dockets from public court records hinting at support payments during the exact timeline of the illness, all pointing to a possible child without direct proof yet. Anna arrived that afternoon, knocking on the door with her laptop bag, and I let her in, leading her straight to the office where we spread the prints on the desk. "These align perfectly," she said, pointing to the transfer dates matching the dockets, enough to raise serious questions about hidden assets and a dependent. "The lawyer can use this to demand a formal DNA test through court if needed, maintaining chain of custody." I stacked the pages carefully and replied, "Exactly, no rushing, but it's locked now. Call Mr. Harlan. Tell him it's for reviewing family inheritance docs at the meeting." She dialed him right there, putting it on speaker as he answered, "Anna, good to hear from you. Yes, I can attend under that guise. Bring any evidence for preliminary advice." Anna explained the setup briefly, saying, "Focus on estate questions for now. The rest unfolds naturally," and he agreed, adding, "I'll prepare papers to petition for a DNA test if the facts warrant. Requirements like probable cause from these records should meet the bar, but results take time." Mark poked his head in the door then, holding Tommy on his hip, and said, "Anna, you're back. Everything okay in here?" She closed her laptop smooth and replied, "Just helping him with some admin stuff. How's the meeting shaping up?" He smiled and said, "Cousins are in too. Mom texted she's coming. Thinks it's a peace offering after the tension." I stood up and took Tommy from him, saying, "That's the point, Mark. Clear the air as a family." While inside, the initiative felt absolute with the dossier complete and the lawyer's presence adding legal weight without tipping our hand yet. The kids wanted snacks after that, so I cut up apples in the kitchen while Anna whispered, "Stay within the law, Mr. Harlan won't present anything up front. He's there for credibility when it hits." I nodded and replied softly, "Understood. The suspicion about a child is strong from the timeline, but we hold the DNA petition as the ace." We spent the next day finalizing details, Anna helping me organize the prints into a locked folder that I stashed in the office drawer. Digital backups triple-checked on the cloud. Mark called Susan to confirm, putting her on speaker as she said, "Mark, dear, I'm glad we're doing this. Time to squash any silly rumors Emily's spreading. I'll bring dessert. It'll be like old times." He hung up and turned to me, saying, "She's overconfident, Em. Hopes it'll smooth everything over." I busied myself wiping the counter and replied, "Maybe it will, in a way," keeping my tone neutral as Lily tugged at my leg, asking, "Mommy, is Grandma coming to play?" I knelt down and said, "Yes, sweetie, and your aunts, too, for a big family dinner." Anna left that evening after dinner, hugging me at the door and whispering, "You've got this. All cards ready, but hold till the moment. The lawyer arrives early on the 31st. On December 30th, I prepped the house slowly, setting the dining table with extra plates and arranging chairs in a circle for the talk, while Mark took the kids to the park for fresh air. The lawyer emailed confirmation, petition draft ready if needed. "Based on the records you described, we can file for a DNA test post-meeting, citing asset discrepancies and potential undisclosed heirs." I forwarded it to Anna, who replied, "Pending results will freeze her in beat 10. Perfect setup." Susan texted the family group chat that afternoon, boasting, "Can't wait for our reconciliation dinner. I've got stories to share that'll remind us all what family means." Her words popped up on my phone as I folded napkins, still triumphant like she'd crushed any challenge, while I stood there in the quiet kitchen, the locked folder in hand, silent and in full control of the board she'd walk onto blind. Mark came back with the kids rosy-cheeked from the cold, and we had a simple lunch, him saying, "Em, inviting the lawyer's a good call, keeps things fair if inheritance talk comes up." I nodded and replied, "Exactly, neutral ground." As Tommy napped on the couch and Lily colored at the table, the day ended with me double-checking the folder one last time, storing it securely. The evidence dossier complete with those emails, transfers, and records building an airtight case of suspicion around a hidden dependent, enough to demand answers without flipping everything yet. Susan sent another text late, a photo of her baking with the caption, "Sweets for my sweet family." See you soon. Still acting like the victor, but I didn't respond. Just set my phone down and headed to bed with Mark, the trap set and the initiative mine alone. We gathered in the living room on New Year's Eve, the buffet table set with sliced ham, rolls, and salads I'd prepared earlier that day. The string lights from Christmas still up but dimmed now, casting long shadows across the circle of chairs where everyone sat with plates on their laps. Mark welcomed Aunt Carol and Uncle Tom first, helping them with their coats as snow flurried outside the window, and I stood nearby, pouring coffee and saying, "Glad you could make it. Let's keep this about clearing the air as a family." Cousin Mike arrived next, clapping Mark on the back and grabbing a roll, while Aunt Beth settled in with a nod to me, murmuring, "Holidays can stir things up. Good to talk it out." Susan came in last, her coat dusted with snow, carrying a store-bought pie and wearing that smug smile as she hugged Mark and said, "Happy New Year's Eve, everyone. Time to put all this nonsense behind us and start fresh." I took the pie from her and replied calmly, "That's the idea, Susan. Have a seat, we're just starting." Mr. Harlan, the lawyer, was already there in the corner, his briefcase at his feet. Introduced earlier by Mark as a consultant for some estate questions, shaking hands quietly with Uncle Tom, who said, "Smart to have a pro here if old docs come up." Everyone filled their plates and chatted lightly at first, Cousin Mike talking about his job and Aunt Carol mentioning the weather, but the undercurrent of tension built as forks clinked on china, and I waited until most had finished eating before clearing my throat. "Thanks for coming," I said, my voice even as I opened the folder in my lap. Mark and I wanted this to be about reconciliation, but some things from Christmas dinner and before need addressing first. Susan set her plate aside and leaned forward with a chuckle, replying, "Oh, Emily, if this is about Lisa again, let's not rehash. It was just old friends catching up. No harm done." Mark glanced at me and said, "Mom, hear her out. We've all got questions." The relatives nodded, Aunt Beth adding, "Fair enough. Family's family." I passed out the first prints then. The scanned emails from Susan to Robert about their discreet meetings around hospital visits, and said, "Actually, Susan, this starts with these requests for secrecy during Dad's illness." Mark took his copy and read it silently, his face tightening as he asked, "Mom, who's Robert? This looks personal." Susan skimmed her page and waved it off, saying, "Old correspondence, Emily. Robert was a colleague helping with paperwork. You're reading too much into it." Uncle Tom adjusted his glasses and replied, "Sue, the wording's odd. Discretion around the hospital? Sounds more than professional." I handed out the next set then. The irregular cash flows with charity labels, but memos tied to Robert's address, and continued calmly, "And these transfers from the family account, timed with those emails, amounts going out regularly to Ohio." Aunt Carol frowned at her sheet and said, "These add up, Sue. Thousands. What charity was this exactly?" Susan shifted in her chair and replied defensively, "Legitimate donations during tough times. Nothing suspicious. Emily's piecing together unrelated things to make me look bad." Mark stared at his paper and murmured, "Mom, the memos have his name. Why?" The room grew quieter, Cousin Mike adding, "Yeah, family funds shouldn't have personal notes like that." I distributed the public records next, the sealed dockets and property details, and said, "Public court filings show support payments linked to that address, plus school records for a dependent, all during the same period." Aunt Beth leaned forward and asked, "Sue, this suggests ongoing obligations. Were you supporting someone out of state without telling us?" Susan's voice sharpened as she replied, "Coincidences, that's all. Old legal stuff from Dad's treatments. No need to drag this up now." I laid out the timeline analysis then, a simple printed chart aligning the illness dates with transfers and dockets, and explained steadily, "See the overlap? Meetings, money, support, all pointing to a hidden dependent, possibly a child, funded by assets that should have stayed in the family." Uncle Tom set his papers down and said sternly, "This looks deliberate, Sue. If there's a kid, that changes inheritance splits." Susan crossed her arms and snapped back, "No child, no link. Just Emily's wild theories to turn you all against me." "Mr." Harlan cleared his throat then, opening his briefcase and pulling out notes as he said, "Based on these documents, there are grounds to reopen the probate review. Subpoenas for full bank records could clarify the flows, and if an undisclosed heir exists, we'd petition for verification." Aunt Carol turned to Susan and asked, "Any reason we shouldn't subpoena those?" "Sue, Susan hesitated, her face flushing as she replied. It'd be a waste. Perjury risks if anyone's lying, but everything's above board. The lawyer continued calmly. Obstruction could lead to charges. And restitution if funds were misallocated, family trusts might require repayment. Mark leaned forward, his voice breaking a little as he held up the memo page and asked directly, Mom, why is Robert's name on these transfers if it's just charity? Be straight with me. Was there a child? The room went still, Susan's eyes darting to the papers. And she finally slumped, her voice cracking as she said, All right, yes, Alex, he's 12. From Robert. It happened during your dad's treatments to protect everyone from more pain. The money was to keep it quiet, not steal, just necessary support. The confession froze the air, Aunt Beth gasping, You hit a grandson and used our money. While Uncle Tom added firmly, That's breach of trust, Sue. Potential fraud. We'll need audits. Susan pleaded then, Mark, it was for the family. I didn't want to burden anyone. But Mark shook his head and replied, You betrayed us all, Mom. We can't ignore this. Mr. Harlan nodded and said, With this admission, subpoenas are warranted. Perjury, if you fight it, plus restitution claims. The relatives murmured agreement, Cousin Mike saying, You're out of events till this is resolved. Sue, no more family funds either. Susan stood up slowly, her face ashen as she gathered her coat and said weakly, You'll regret this turning on your own mother. But Aunt Carol replied, You turned first, time to go. She left alone into the snow, the door clicking shut behind her. Isolated now with legal shadows looming over audits and possible suits for the hidden assets, Mark turned to me in the quiet that followed, hugging me tight as he said, Em, you did what was right, I stand with you. The relatives nodded, Uncle Tom adding, Emily's family now fully let's rebuild without secrets. We cleared the plates in peace, starting a stronger life that night. Dignity restored and marriage solid. No more meddling shadows. As fireworks popped outside at midnight, the table sat empty but calm, a symbol of cleared chaos. And I thought to myself, family secrets have a way of coming to dinner uninvited. My dear, if you're watching this and feel your heart growing heavy, then perhaps you are just like me, someone who has endured so much just to keep a home peaceful, someone who stayed silent just so others could feel comfortable. I don't know your story, but if there was ever a time you thought, it's okay, I can take a little more, then please leave me a comment with just one sentence. I have endured. Well, I cannot promise to change everything for you, but I want you to know this. Suffering in silence is not your duty, and staying quiet for too long will make you lose yourself. If today you aren't strong enough to say no, that's okay. Just don't blame yourself. And if this story feels like it's speaking for your heart, please subscribe and stay here with me so that every day I can remind you that the person who sacrifices the most also deserves to be treated with kindness. On screen right now, you'll see 2 new stories I think you'll really enjoy. There are many more waiting for you on the channel. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one. See you in the next story. Until then, take care of yourself and the people you love. With all my love and respect.